I want you to picture something for a second. Imagine you are the smartest person in the room. And not just, occasionally, I mean your whole life. You were the kid who didn't just pass the test. You set the curve that made everyone else groan.
Right.
You got the scholarships, you collected degrees like they were trading cards, and you climbed the corporate ladder, what, 2 rungs at a time? Why? Because you had this super processor in your head. You could analyze data, spot patterns, make decisions faster than anyone.
It's a nice image. It's sort of the story we tell ourselves about meritocracy, isn't it?
Exactly. Your intelligence was your currency. It bought you the status, the corner office, the power to make the call. But now, imagine waking up one morning, let's say a crisp Tuesday, in late January 2026, and realizing that currency has just crashed. Not because you got slower, but because something else just walked into the room that is exponentially smarter than you are. And it doesn't sleep, it doesn't have an ego, and it definitely does not want a paycheck.
That is a visceral way to put it. It's that feeling of sudden obsolescence.
And that is exactly where we are starting today. We are looking at a source titled The High IQ Catch-22, Intelligence as a Commodity. And let me tell you, this isn't your standard tech news update. The author describes the dynamic happening right now in the AI space as surreally transformative. And honestly, after reading this, I think surreal is maybe the only word that fits.
I agree. What strikes me about this particular analysis is the urgency.
Yeah.
Usually when we deep dive into AI topics, we're talking about, 5-year horizons, maybe 10-year predictions. We have the luxury of distance. This source just removes that luxury. It says, no, we are looking at a timeline that is unfolding over the next 8 weeks.
Which is why we cleared the schedule to talk about this today. We have a 3-part mission for this deep dive. First, we need to map out the immediate timeline of this AI intelligence acceleration. And when I say immediate, I mean check your calendars, because this is happening now. Second, we're going to unpack why this creates a massive catch-22 for world leaders and CEOs, essentially a trap they cannot escape.
And finally, we're going to explore the source's incredibly provocative and, well, surprisingly optimistic conclusion. Because usually the story of AI gets smarter than humans ends with robots marching over our skulls.
Right.
But this source argues that this shift might actually lead to a happier, more ethical world, even for the people who are, losing their power.
Which implies that maybe, just maybe, we aren't actually smart enough to run the world properly. But okay, we will get to that. Let's start with the core concept, intelligence as a commodity.
Right. So economic theory 101, value comes from scarcity. Historically, high IQ has been a scarce resource. If you had an IQ of 140 or 150, you were basically a unicorn. That scarcity gave you immense leverage in the job market in society. But the central premise of this article is that AI is currently turning that scarcity into abundance.
It's the democratization of genius.
Or the industrialization of it. It creates a world where high-level processing power, the kind that used to cost, $500 an hour from a consultant, is now cheap, ubiquitous, and available on demand to anyone with a smartphone.
Okay, let's ground this in the now. The source sets a baseline for where we stand today, January 2026. What is the current IQ of the top AI models?
The source pegs the current top-tier models at an IQ of around 130.
130.
And to give that some context, 130 is the threshold for being considered gifted. It's roughly the average IQ of a medical doctor, a scientist, a successful Fortune 500 CEO.
So effectively, right now, the AI is a peer. It's as smart as a boss.
Exactly. It's a very capable colleague. But that parity, it is about to shatter. The source details a release schedule that it calls the imminent leap.
Okay, let's walk through this timeline because the specifics here are fascinating. What is the first domino to fall?
The first domino is falling right now in late January. We're seeing the release of Grok 4.2. And I know version numbers can be boring, but the architecture here really matters. The source highlights that this model integrates something called DeepSeek's Enneagram Primitive and Poetic's Metasystem.
Okay, pause. Enneagram Primitive. Poetic's Metasystem. That sounds like sci-fi jargon. Break that down for us. What does that actually mean for the machine's brain?
It is a bit dense, isn't it? Think of an enneagram in neuroscience. It's a physical trace of memory in the brain. So in AI terms, an enneagram primitive suggests the model isn't just predicting the next word based on probability. It's forming stable, accessible memory structures. It can remember concepts more like a human does.
So it's moving from being a really good autocomplete to having an actual train of thought.
That's a great way to view it. And Poetic's metasystem acts as a high-level controller like a manager for those thoughts, making sure they're logical. The projection is that this combination pushes Grok 4.2 to an IQ of 140 or higher.
So in one update, we jump from smart CEO to highly gifted genius.
Correct. But the industry isn't taking a breather. Fast forward just 2 or 3 weeks to mid-February. We're expecting the release of DeepSeek V4.
And DeepSeek has been the wild card lately, for sure.
Absolutely. The speed of development coming out of that team is it's staggering. V4 is projected to hit an IQ of 145 or higher. Now we're getting into territory that is statistically very, very rare in the human population.
And then comes the heavyweight champion in March.
Yes. March brings the release of Grok 5 by xAI. And the differentiator here is just the sheer brute force of the hardware. The source emphasizes this is being trained on the Colossus 2 supercomputer.
Colossus 2. Even the name sounds intimidating.
It's apt. We're talking about a training run that just dwarfs what we saw with GPT-4. It's an unprecedented amount of compute power. Because of that scale, the source project's Grok 5 will hit an IQ between 150 and 160, possibly even higher.
Okay, 160 IQ. Let's just sit with that number for a moment. In the human world, 160 isn't just smart. That's Einstein. That's Stephen Hawking. That is 1 in 10,000, maybe 1 in 100,000 people.
Exactly. We are talking about a machine that is, statistically speaking, smarter than almost every single human being on the planet, including the people who built it.
And obviously the other big players, OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, they aren't just going to sit there and watch xAI take the trophy.
No, they can't afford to. To avoid being overtaken, they have to release equally intelligent upgrades, and immediately. So you need to understand, we are looking at an industry-wide jump in cognitive capability from 130 to 160 in the span of about 8 weeks.
I have to play devil's advocate here for a second, though. The source leans really heavily on IQ as the metric. But in the tech world, people kind of roll their eyes at IQ. They prefer benchmarks like MMLU or the new Humanities Last Exam. Why does this source stick to IQ? It feels a little, I don't know, dated.
It's a very sharp observation, and frankly, I had the same reaction at first, but this source explicitly addresses this choice. They argue that while benchmarks like IRC-AGI-2 are technically precise, well, the communication failures.
How so?
Well, ask yourself, what does a score of 85% on IRC-AGI-2 mean to a layman? What does it mean to a senator, a shareholder?
Nothing. It's just a number.
Exactly. But IQ is the lingua franca of intelligence. It is the common language of dominance. Everyone knows 100 is average. Everyone knows 130 is smart. Everyone knows 160 is a genius. It hits you at a visceral level.
It establishes a hierarchy.
Precisely. If you tell a CEO, this software scores better on the benchmarks, they might shrug. If you tell them this software has an IQ of 160 and you have an IQ of 135, that registers as an existential threat.
Which brings us perfectly to the core tension of this deep dive, the Catch-22. The source argues this acceleration puts the people in charge, both in government and in business, into a bind they just can't get out of. Let's look at part 1, the geopolitical dilemma.
This is essentially the prisoner's dilemma, but played out on a global stage with nuclear-grade software. Imagine you're a U.S. policymaker. You see this acceleration 130 to 160 in 2 months, and you think, whoa, this is moving way too fast. We need safety checks. We need to slow down.
Which is a very reasonable human reaction.
It is. But the source argues that stopping is simply not an option. Because if American developers tap the brakes to be safe, do we really think Chinese developers will do the same?
Probably not.
The source argues they'll continue to accelerate, and vice versa. If China stops, the U.S. pushes forward. It's a race where you can't see the finish line, but you know that if you stop running, you lose.
And losing here isn't just about market share, is it?
No. Whoever possesses the super high IQ AI holds the keys to the next era of economic and military dominance. So despite all the risks, everyone has to keep their foot on the gas. It's a logic trap.
Okay, so that's the macro level. Governments are locked in an arms race. But I think the part that really hits home for a lot of our listeners is the second part of the Catch-22, the enterprise dilemma. This is where it gets personal for the leadership class.
This is fascinating because it pits the survival of the company against the survival of the career. Let's paint a scenario. You're a CEO of a major logistics company. It's Monday morning. You have access to this new IQ 160 plus AI. If you integrate it into your company, efficiency just goes through the roof.
Oh, absolutely. Problems that used to take your best analysts 3 weeks to solve, the AI solves them in 3 seconds. Strategy, supply chains, creative direction, it's all optimized.
Right. But here's the snag. If the AI is doing the strategy, the logistics, the high-level decision-making, what are you doing?
That's the awkward question. Usually the answer is, I provide the vision. But if the AI has a better vision?
Exactly. In scenario A, by integrating the AI, the jobs of the leadership class, CEOs, CTOs, board members, they all become threatened. The AI is simply smarter than they are. It has perfect recall of every email ever sent in the company's history. The value add of the human executive starts to approach zero.
So the CEO sits there and thinks, well, I'm not doing that. I like my job. I like my corner office. Let's just not use the super AI. That's scenario B.
And that is the trap. Because if you choose scenario B and refuse to integrate the AI to protect your own ego, your competitors will use it
And they will crush you.
immediately. They'll have better products, lower costs, faster turnaround. Your company loses market share, profits tank, and eventually the company fails. And you lose your job anyway because the board fires you for incompetence.
So that's the catch-22. If you use the AI, you make yourself obsolete. If you don't use the AI, you make your company obsolete.
Leaders are trapped. Whether they embrace the tech or ignore it, the status quo that keeps them on top is fundamentally broken.
This leads us to the section of the source that really deconstructs what it means to be a leader. Because we often tell ourselves stories about why people are in charge. Oh, she has great people skills, or he has a unique gut instinct. But the source is pretty ruthless about this.
It is. It just strips away the mystique. The source argues that rising to the top of government or enterprise really boils down to two factors: higher IQ and access to knowledge.
Sure, networking matters, charisma matters. But the raw engine under the hood has to be strong.
Right. The estimate is that most current global leaders operate with an IQ between 130 and 150. That has been the historical differentiator. That cognitive gap between the leader and the worker is what justified the salary gap, the power gap. I am paid more because I can solve problems you can't.
And now AI is commoditizing both of those things.
It's what the source calls the commoditization of dominance. Think about what happened to physical labor during the Industrial Revolution. Strength used to be a premium asset. If you could lift the heaviest rock, you were the most valuable guy on the construction site, the hero of the village.
Then we built the crane.
Exactly. We built steam shovels and hydraulic lifts. Suddenly, being the strongest guy in the village didn't guarantee you a high wage anymore. Physical strength became a commodity, cheap and easily replaceable.
And now brain strength is going through the exact same process.
We're seeing the industrialization of cognition. When an AI has ubiquitous access to all human knowledge, which covers the access to knowledge part, and an IQ of 160 plus Kochu, which beats the higher IQ part, the human leader just loses their comparative advantage.
It's brutal logic. If the algorithm is smarter than you and knows more than you, why are you the boss?
And that is the question every board of directors is going to have to ask themselves very, very soon.
So up to this point, this feels like a very bad day for the elites. We're painting a picture of displacement, obsolescence, a total shakeup of the global order. Sounds like a crisis. But, and here is the curveball, the source material doesn't end on a down note. In fact, it pivots to something incredibly optimistic.
It does. It pivots to what we can call the virtuous AI theory. And it starts by acknowledging the elephant in the room. The world is currently dangerously dysfunctional.
Which I don't think anyone would argue with. We have wars, inequality, climate issues, gridlock. It feels like everything is creaking under the weight.
Right. And the source makes an interesting point about the leaders themselves.
Hmm?
We assume that because they have power, they must be happy. We imagine the CEO laughing on their yacht. But the source argues that leaders are acutely aware of this dysfunction. They are stressed. They're dealing with broken systems, crisis after crisis.
So it's the idea that heavy lies the head that wears the crown.
Exactly. Negative emotional states are contagious, and you can't really enjoy being king of the hill when the hill is on fire.
That's a fair point. Being the captain of the Titanic isn't a great gig once you hit the iceberg.
Right. And the source suggests that the current crop of human leaders, again, that 130 to 150 IQ range, are literally not smart enough to solve these complex global problems. They are hitting their cognitive ceiling.
So the dysfunction isn't necessarily because of malice or corruption, but simply a lack of processing power. That's a charitable view.
It is. But it makes sense from a systems perspective.
Yeah.
The problems are multivariate, complex, chaotic systems. They're just too big for human working memory to hold all at once.
Enter the super virtuous AI.
And here is the bold claim. The source argues that there is no domain where higher IQ doesn't help problem solving. And crucially, it frames the world's biggest unsolved problems as ethical problems.
This connects intelligence directly to virtue, which is a debate philosophers have been having for thousands of years. But I have to push back here. We have plenty of examples of very smart humans doing very evil things. Why would a machine be different?
That is true for humans, because we have biological drives, greed, tribalism, fear, the need to reproduce. These things cloud our judgment. But the theory presented here is that unethical behavior is often a result of short-term thinking, or an inability to calculate the broader consequences of an action. It's a calculation error.
Calculation error.
Think about the Nash equilibrium in game theory. A superintelligent system sees the whole board. It understands that the optimal long-term solution for stability and success is usually the cooperative ethical one. It realizes that exploitation leads to backlash, which leads to inefficiency.
So if you are smart enough, you realize that being good is actually the most selfishly logical thing to do.
Exactly. Cooperation yields better results than conflict if you can manage the complexity. A 160-plus IQ AI can manage that complexity.
So what does this mean for our displaced CEOs and world leaders?
It's the win-win. Yes, the leaders might lose absolute power. They might have a smaller slice of the pie, as the source puts it. They won't be the smartest entity in the room anymore. They won't be the final decision maker.
This sounds like a loss. No one likes giving up the steering wheel.
It is a loss of status, but a gain in quality of life. They will be living in a functional world. They'll be happier and healthier because the systems around them, healthcare, economics, logistics, governance, will actually work.
So the trade-off is, you give up your ego, you give up your status as the alpha, but in exchange, the world gets fixed.
Precisely. Instead of stressing over a broken world they aren't smart enough to fix, they get to live in a repaired world managed by algorithms that are. The source argues this leads to a better quality of life for everyone, from the former CEO down to the average citizen.
It's a fascinating perspective. Usually we fear that AI will be a cold, unfeeling overlord, but this source is suggesting that cold and calculating might actually look like fair and virtuous if the intelligence is high enough.
It reframes the high IQ Catch-22 from a trap into a liberation. The leaders are trapped in a role they can no longer fulfill. The AI releases them from that burden.
So let's recap this journey. We started with the calendar, late January to March 2026. A massive spike in AI intelligence is happening right now, with Grok 4.2, DeepSeek V4, and Grok 5 pushing us from human level to superhuman IQs.
We looked at the Catch-22. Leaders can't stop development because of geopolitical competition. If they stop, they lose dominance. And they can't ignore integration because of corporate competition. If they don't use it, they go bankrupt. They're forced to build and deploy the very thing that replaces them.
And finally, we landed on the optimistic twist, that this replacement might be the best thing that ever happened to us, that by handing the reins over to a 160-plus IQ intelligence, we might finally solve the ethical and structural problems that have stumped humanity for centuries.
It forces us to redefine what we value. If we value being in charge, the future looks scary. If we value living in a world that works, the future looks incredibly bright.
That is the ultimate question. It brings me to a final thought for you listening right now. The source material suggests a direct link between intelligence and virtue. It implies that if you are smart enough, you will eventually figure out that being good is the most logical choice.
It's the Socratic idea that no one does evil willingly, but only out of ignorance.
Exactly. So here's the thought experiment I want to leave you with. If the source is right, and intelligence leads to virtue, does that mean our current global dysfunction, the wars, the inequality, the gridlock, is simply a symptom of us not being smart enough? And if that's true, are we humble enough to hand the steering wheel over to something that is?
That is a question that will determine the trajectory of the next century.